Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I woke up this morning to the very sad news of what was going on in Washington, D.C. And while it's fine in democracies to protest, there's no place whatsoever for rioting and lawlessness. And it was a very horrific scene to see the storming of the U.S. Capitol. And this is not something that should ever take place in a democracy. And it's something that was not America at its best, but we will recover and move on. So I wanted
because protest doesn't mean that you storm the Parliament Hall.
Exactly. It has to be peaceful. And we allow that of any concern in our country, but when it gets to be violent, it's unacceptable under any standard.
What have been your dull moments?
You know, it's a wonderful opportunity to be the U.S. ambassador to India. And it's a relationship in a country where there aren't dull moments. It's a around-the-clock job. I've loved it in every respect. And I can think of many exciting moments, but I really can't think of dull moments.
Dull moments. I asked you the most challenging question to begin with.
Okay. If I thought about it some more, maybe I'd come up with something. But it's a relationship that covers the scope of human endeavor. We deal with every issue, whether it's defense, counterterrorism, non-proliferation, energy, the environment, trade, investment, education, agriculture, health, science and technology, space, the oceans, and so much more. So there's more than enough to keep one busy.
Let me ask you a question that anchors usually ask corporate tycoons after the budget. Where do you rate the change during your tenure or during the Trump years on a scale of 10? Where were we when Trump administration began and generally your tenure began, and where are we now?
Well, let me not get into the number game, but let me just give you a more descriptive answer. I've been fortunate to work on the U.S.-India relationship for 20 years now in various capacities as Undersecretary of Commerce, as a technology executive in the investment world, and now as ambassador. And the relationship has steadily expanded and deepened and improved. And so I was taking over a relationship that was in good shape.
As we noticed when you took me with the display of pictures on the walls, that for the past 20 years, this relationship has just been in overdrive.
Yeah.
And completely bipartisan.
I remember when George W. Bush said, it does not make sense that the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy don't have a more expansive relationship. And he was determined to try to transform that, building on the visit at the end of President Clinton's term by him, and really starting to change that dynamic. And I was fortunate to be involved in that at the outset. And if you look at where we were then and where we are today, it's extraordinary. I'm not sure anyone would have thought we would be this close and be involved this extensively in all issues. I think it's a question of how you express your strategic autonomy. I understand strategic autonomy to be India wants to have independence of action and to be free from the coercion of any other country. You can do that in a variety of different ways. And so that then gets to the trade-offs you make to preserve or express your strategic autonomy in the evolving environment that you're facing in the international arena. And as I said, I think as challenges grow in certain areas, you may find that you have to make adjustments to the expression of strategic autonomy while still keeping your independence and not feeling that you're subservient to any one country.
And the third postulate that there is trouble, that there are tensions with leftover issues of the Cold War.
Well, America
and mindsets.
Yeah. This may be generational. It may change as younger people take more positions of power, as people who've been educated in the United States have a different view of it than people who dealt with the United States during the Cold War. Our country is often able to pivot and look forward more easily than others because we don't have as long a history and we don't perhaps view things always in that same perspective. I look at Vietnam. Vietnam we had a war with, and yet we're very close together today in terms of how we work together. So it is a mindset, but I would like to think that people can look forward rather than be overly obsessive about what might have happened in the past.
I prefer not to use the word frustration, but what's been your biggest challenge where you thought this really should be moving?
Well, I think one area that when I came into office, I was determined to try to make substantial progress on were these pivotal defense agreements that we have been negotiating with India for many years. I was at a Track 2 dialogue, and I think someone said some of these have been negotiated for 10 years. This was before I became ambassador.
In fact, some for longer, yes.
Yes. And again, it seemed to me these make sense. And somehow, are we not communicating the purpose behind these? This is not an effort to control or subordinate another country. And I remember we went to, with the defense minister at the time, Minister Sitaraman, to the Indo-Pacific headquarters in Hawaii and showed her some of the capabilities one could acquire if they signed a COMCASA agreement, secure communications or other types of agreements. And I think people started to understand the benefits of them. And we've now concluded at each of the 2+2 ministerials 3 pivotal defense agreements, and they have elevated the defense partnership to an entirely new level. And I think my Indian colleagues truly appreciate the utility of them and have seen it in action and are very anxious to negotiate supplements to them.
That's right. So when you say they've seen this in action, the benefits in action, I presume that we are referring particularly to the situation that arose April onwards in Ladakh with the Chinese.
Yeah, again, every journalist in India has asked me about what we are doing with India on China. That's not for me to discuss whether we're doing anything, or if so, what it is. That's an issue for the government of India, if they so choose to talk about.
You have your own analysis. Why did the Chinese do what they did? I mean, why? What do they want to achieve? And also the timing.
I think this has been a bit of a mystery to everyone because there's been no explicit statement as to what the objective was. Whether it was something that grew out of a particular on-site episode and then mushroomed beyond that. It did occur at the same time. There were disruptions in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea. There were claims for the territory of eastern Bhutan. And it is troubling because it wasn't...
That's like 1/4 of Bhutan.
Yeah. It's troubling because it wasn't a isolated incident, but it occurred across the entire border in the Ladakh area and at a great magnitude in terms of the number of troops and the amount of heavy equipment. And so the fact that this has now gone on for 8-9 months indicates that this is going to be a long-term challenge, and this is not something that was an episodic incident, and I think it has deeply affected the levels of trust between the two countries and will continue to affect what develops more broadly in this region.
Why should the US be taking India so seriously? Why should it be giving India the kind of importance that India thinks it deserves? Give me a view of India from Washington.
Okay, well, I think one of the enduring legacies of this administration will be to have really solidified the concept of the Indo-Pacific, right, which connects India and the Indian Ocean to East Asia and the Pacific, integrates from the west coast of the United States to the east coast of Africa, and puts India in a central position in terms of the broader stability and prosperity of that region.
An expression that we haven't heard yet from Biden or his people, Indo-Pacific.
Well, I would tend to think that this is something that, while it had been talked about episodically before the current administration, has really now taken deep roots. President Trump spoke about it. In 2017, Prime Minister Modi spoke about it. ASEAN and ASEAN centrality is part of the Indo-Pacific. I hear the European countries now referring to the Indo-Pacific, and it recognizes the reality of international trade and of this region. And India, as a vibrant democracy, is going to be a key player in that, because as I referred to earlier, you really have to, one of the lessons of the COVID-19 pandemic is that globalization cannot mean doing everything in the most cost-efficient way. It means trying to get the benefits of the international system, but also mitigating political risks and taking into account the fact that you don't want to be overly dependent in critical areas on partners you may not be able to trust. But if you're looking for trusted, like-minded partners, India, the United States, Japan, Australia, these are core countries of the Indo-Pacific region. And India is a key player, and a strong and democratic India is in the interests of the United States. And that's why we have supported India's rise on the global stage, and it's in our national security strategy.
How much of a shadow will China now cast over the way global relationships and strategic balance develops?
Look, I think this is still an unknown question. The principles behind the Indo-Pacific is that it should be an inclusive region, that we want to benefit from everyone's growth. China is integrated in a lot of our economic activities. It's very different than the Cold War situation. And so how we manage that rise and how China manages that rise will be the great issue for the next 5 to 10 years. Ideally, it can be in a way that's mutually beneficial. If it starts to be in a way that becomes conflictual, and no one wants a conflict, I don't think the Chinese do, I don't think India does, and I know the United States does not. So we have to figure out how do we manage that rise and the influence that China has in a way that can be beneficial and not detrimental.
So staying with this, again coming at it from the Indian point of view. China is a big power, the US is a big power. We may laugh at it sometimes, but that's because you can laugh at the US, right? It's a democracy. Two big powers can decide to kiss and make up and leave others who are targeted by either of them out in the cold.
This concept of a G2 has been floating around for a while, but it just is not credible in my view. It's not the way things happen in the world. As I said, the United States and India and other countries want to figure out a way to interact constructively with China if that is possible. But I seriously doubt that anyone thinks that suddenly the United States would abandon all of its relationships and work out a global pact with the Chinese in terms of how to manage the world. It's just not practical in my point of view. And you know, again, we believe that our interests are in common with other democracies, and that's what we want to build on to spread the sort of principles and values that we think matter, and that will be beneficial for our people. I have not had unpleasant conversations. India is an incredibly respectful country, and they treat the U.S. ambassador with great respect.
Unpleasant is in perspective.
Okay, but I also, you know, I believe I'm a straight shooter. I'm candid, I'm open, I'm direct. You know that. Yeah, and I think, I like to think that that's appreciated. And so this goes back to the evolving relationship with my Indian counterparts. In 2001, it would be a very different conversation than it is in 2020 or 2021. There's now a level of trust, a comfort level, habits of cooperation that mean when we disagree, we try to figure out what's behind it and whether we can resolve it.
As an American diplomat, how do you deal with the twin challenge of a country which has closed economy as far as trade is concerned, reasonably closed, or not as open as you'd want to be, and also at the same time not socially as liberal as it used to be, or it is reputed to be?
Look, India has its own internal decisions to make on its economy or other policies. We have a stake in having India have a strong economy, both because of our affection for the people of India and because a strong economy underpins what India can do in the region and in the world. It can modernize its military, it provides jobs for its people, and it provides growth and prosperity. So we feel that openness brings about the type of growth and consumer choice and jobs that would be most beneficial. We think that's been borne out by the history, not just of India after the 1990 reforms, 1991 reforms, but also in countries in East Asia that increasingly open their economy. Again, India is a vibrant democracy, incredibly diverse country. It's really many countries rolled up into one. You travel around the country, you meet people of all different types and religions. There's more newspapers in New Delhi than, half the east coast of the United States. And so, yeah, there are issues that get attention that may be troubling, and there are other things that make it a very vibrant democracy. India holds elections with 600 to 700 million people without a hitch. It's an extraordinary thing. I say that watching our own.
But democracies can have their aberrations, as we saw last night yeah. Indian time in Washington. So this democracy can also have its aberrations. And I know that Trump administration was very helpful to Indian government in the Congress, etc., on these issues. But how concerned would you be about these issues, tolerance, liberalism, India's secular values? How concerned would you be about the shadow this may cast on India-US ties going ahead?
Again, we're both democracies, we're both resilient, we have processes to react to things that the public may disagree with. We also have elections that empower certain individuals. As I've said, diversity is a strength for both of our countries. It's really what contributes a lot to our successes. And India has the motto, unity in diversity. The United States says e pluribus unum, out of many one. And we both benefit from the contributions of diverse people to our societies. And quite frankly, it's what gives us, I think, some of our status in the world and is one of the strengths of our relationship. So if in either country, because neither are perfect, we get out of kilter in that will have an impact. But hopefully, just as you saw in the United States, if something happens that is regrettable, it gets corrected.
If you read President-elect Biden's earlier article in Foreign Affairs, there is nothing there, it doesn't specifically refer to Indo-Pacific in these terms, but there's nothing there that should worry India. Because he's also talking about building an alliance of democracies and like-minded countries to counter China. So that seems to be quite a bit of bipartisanship there.
Yeah, again, I don't know that he would add that last part about the counter China. I think what we want to be doing is building something positive. To the degree others want to participate in that, that's certainly possible. But we've enunciated a vision for this region. We've enunciated a set of principles that it's free, it's open, freedom of overflight, freedom of navigation, that disputes are resolved peacefully, that there's no predatory financing. Now we've got to put in place some of the mechanics to give meaning to those principles and to ensure that that's the type of region that develops and that we don't wake up one day and have a very different region. And that will involve establishing guidelines, standards, and maybe even, if necessary, red lines.
So what kind of mind space did Pakistan occupy during your tenure? Have we truly dehyphenated or not?
Well, I think it's dehyphenated in the United States. I think this administration and this president was the first one to really, in a very strong way, call out cross-border terrorism as unacceptable as any other form of terrorism, and to suspend military assistance as a consequence. And our view is that we want everyone in this region to try to promote peace and prosperity and not to in any way give comfort to those who might be involved in cross-border.
Let's look ahead. One thing that we saw over the past 4 years is that Trump administration never talked publicly about India's internal issues, troublesome internal issues. Do you expect that to continue, or will that change? Because President-elect Biden has said things in the past.
Yeah, sometimes when you're in power, you adjust what you do. I certainly think as an ambassador, you're best discussing disagreements, and they may be disagreements India has with the United States or vice versa, privately. Once you discuss things publicly, you put constraints on the action that can be taken, in my opinion, to deal with the issue. So if you have concerns, it's best to discuss them privately, and that's what
So that's the principle of not letting disagreements become controversies or disagreements becoming disputes.
It's not only not letting them become disputes, I also think it works against, whatever the disagreement may be, works against actually resolving the issue, because it tends to force parties to harden positions, to defend things publicly. It changes the dynamic. So on any issue that you may have a disagreement, if you're trying to resolve it, I think it's best to try to do it quietly. I think those out of the government, then that's what they're doing, and making a living by criticizing and speaking publicly, and that's their prerogative. But when you're in government, you want to ultimately achieve your objectives. Making a statement that you feel good about doesn't achieve the objective you want to accomplish. And to achieve the objective, I think you're better off doing it person to person rather than broadcasting it. And again, that cuts across any type of issue.
Have you done any more interviews before this, one-on-one?
I've done a few interviews, but I have not seen my role as being a public spokesperson. I'm fortunate that I came to this relationship knowing many, if not most, of the key players, and people knowing me, and that the United States did have a very solid and strong relationship. Often I think ambassadors do a lot of public relations work if they're trying to establish themselves or the relationship or to change something. I was fortunate that I had a lot of that groundwork already done, and so I didn't feel that it was necessary, and again, I didn't necessarily feel it would even be productive. And I don't think it's hurt my ability to be successful here and productive, and as I have indicated, I think the whole relationship has greatly grown and expanded over time, but the last 4 years have really been a period of ambition and achievement.
So now that you're speaking a little bit, you've seen the response from the Chinese embassy here.
Yes. Yeah. Again, that's their prerogative to object to things. They've been objecting to a lot of things lately that they've seen. I'm not sure it was going to have any particular impact on what is actually done, and it almost seemed pro forma.
Right. I think the reaction was sharper, if anything, when Secretary of State Pompeo was here.
Yeah.
Yeah.